The desert was a vast ocean of gold and rust, the kind of place where silence had a weight of its own. Sheriff Luke McGraw rode alone through the canyon, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust that shimmered in the dying light. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and amber, and the air carried that dry, metallic taste that came before rain. He'd spent the day rounding up stray cattle that had wandered too far from the herd. It was supposed to be a quiet evening ride home, nothing more. But the desert had a strange way of turning peace into trouble when you least expected it. Luke was the kind of man people either feared or respected, depending on how close they stood to him. His face bore the marks of hard living, a faint scar tracing down from his temple to his jaw, a remnant from a saloon fight years back. His eyes were a sharp steel blue that missed little, and though he spoke rarely, when he did, people listened. He'd been sheriff of Dry Creek for 5 years, long enough to learn that every story had two sides and sometimes neither of them was the truth. He tugged the brim of his hat lower, glancing at the sky. The wind had shifted, blowing cool from the north. "Storm's coming," he muttered to his horse, Duke, a big chestnut stallion with more sense than most men Luke knew. As they reached the river bend, something caught his attention. At first he thought it was just a flash of movement, maybe a deer or a wild dog coming to drink. But then he heard it, a faint cry, high and desperate, carried by the wind. Luke stiffened. It wasn't an animal. It was a human voice, female, frightened, fading fast. He kicked Duke's sides, urging him forward, galloping down the slope until the sound grew louder, clearer. The river, swollen from the week's rains, churned like a living thing, twisting and foaming around jagged rocks. And there, caught in the violent current, was a woman. Her arms flailed as she fought to keep her head above the water. For an instant, Luke froze, startled by the sight. She wasn't from town. Her skin glowed bronze against the cold blue of the river, her long black hair tangling in the rush of water. She wore buckskin clothing, Apache made, and a turquoise necklace that gleamed in the dying light. Luke didn't think twice. He tossed off his hat, kicked off his boots, and dove headfirst into the river. The cold hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. The current dragged at him relentless, but he pushed through it, muscles burning, lungs screaming. He reached her just as she went under, grabbing her arm and pulling her upward. She gasped, coughing and choking, her body trembling with exhaustion. "Hold on!" Luke shouted over the roar of the river. "I've got you." It wasn't easy. The current was strong and she was half conscious, her weight dragging him down. But Luke fought with everything he had, using one arm to swim, the other to keep her above the surface. They slammed against a rock, pain shooting up his side, but he didn't let go. Inch by inch, he pushed toward the bank until his boots found solid ground beneath the shallows. With a final heave, he pulled her onto the muddy shore, collapsing beside her, both of them gasping for air. For a few moments, there was only the sound of the river and their ragged breathing. Luke rolled onto his side, blinking water out of his eyes. The woman was alive, barely. She lay on her back, chest rising and falling fast, eyes closed, lips trembling. He leaned closer, checking her pulse, then gently lifted her head to keep her airway clear. "You're all right now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "You're safe." Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes dark as obsidian, filled with something fierce even in her weakness. She coughed, shivering. "No, touch me," she said in broken English, her voice hoarse but commanding. Luke froze, taken aback by the sudden fire in her tone. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice calm. "You were drowning. I pulled you out." She tried to sit up, but her body gave out and she fell forward against him. Instinctively, he caught her to keep her from hitting the ground. The moment he did, his fingers brushed against the soft leather of her shirt, and the wet fabric tore slightly at the shoulder. It wasn't much, just a small rip, but she reacted instantly. Her eyes widened in shock and then fury. She pushed away from him, stumbling to her feet, her breathing sharp and fast. Luke stood slowly, water dripping from his clothes. "It was an accident," he began, but she wasn't listening. She was backing away, her hand clutching the torn fabric to her chest, her expression shifting from rage to humiliation. "No right," she hissed, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "You touch Apache woman, you shame her." Luke lifted his hands in surrender. "Ma'am, I was trying to save your life." "I didn't mean any harm." Her gaze burned into him. "You not understand," she said bitterly. "You take what not yours. You bring curse." Then, with a final glare, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her wet footprints vanishing into the dust and shadows. For a long moment, Luke just stood there watching where she had gone. The wind had died. The river, calmer now, whispered against the stones as if mocking him. He ran a hand through his soaked hair, exhaling hard. "Well, that went well," he muttered under his breath. Duke whinnied softly from the hill above, as if in agreement. He climbed back up to his horse, wringing water from his shirt as he went. The storm clouds had gathered overhead now, heavy and gray, blotting out the last of the sunset. As he mounted Duke, lightning cracked in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. He cast one last look toward the trees. She was gone, vanished like smoke into the wilderness. But something about her expression, that fierce defiance, stuck in his mind. On the ride back, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed into something deeper than he understood. He knew of the Apache. They were proud, protective of their land and their honor. The settlers in town spoke of them with fear and suspicion, but Luke had never had reason to mistrust them. He believed in fairness, in giving every soul a chance to prove themselves. But now, with one torn shirt and a misunderstanding, he had accidentally insulted someone from a world with rules he didn't yet grasp. By the time he reached the outskirts of Dry Creek, the rain had begun to fall, light at first, then harder, drumming against the brim of his hat. The streets were empty. Most folks had turned in for the night. Luke tied Duke outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside, shaking off the water. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern. He sank into his chair, sighing, his mind replaying the scene again and again. The flash of anger in her eyes, the way she spoke the word shame like it carried the weight of her whole people. He poured himself a shot of whiskey and sat in silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert, echoing like drums. He didn't know her name or why she'd been alone near the river at dusk. But he knew this, something had changed. The land felt heavier tonight, as if holding its breath. He had a feeling this wouldn't be the last he saw of the woman by the river. Hours passed and the rain eased. Luke finally rose, blowing out the lantern, ready to call it a night. But before he left, he glanced once more out the window. For a brief second, he thought he saw movement near the edge of town, a shadow standing still in the rain, watching. He blinked and it was gone. "Maybe it's just the storm playing tricks," he muttered. Still, unease settled deep in his gut. He didn't know that far beyond the ridge, in a camp lit by 100 fires. The Apache warriors were already gathering, their leader listening as a young woman spoke of a cowboy who had torn her shirt and dishonored her. Luke lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. The storm had passed, but in his mind the river still roared. He didn't yet understand that what he thought was an accident would soon ripple through two worlds, his and hers, and that by the time the sun rose again, the desert would no longer be silent. It would be waiting. Morning came slow and heavy, wrapped in a haze of pale sunlight that filtered through the cracked windows of the sheriff's office. The rain had washed the dust from the streets, leaving behind a thin layer of mud that reflected the faint shimmer of the rising sun. Sheriff Luke McGraw stirred awake in his chair, the remains of a sleepless night clinging to him like a second skin. He'd tried to convince himself that what happened by the river had been nothing more than a misunderstanding, something that would fade with the dawn. But the look in the Apache woman's eyes haunted him still, a mix of fury, pain, and something deeper, something ancient. He rubbed the back of his neck and stood, stretching sore muscles that protested every movement. The air smelled of wet sage and wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Outside, Dry Creek was slowly waking up. Merchants pulling open shutters, ranch hands heading to the stables, and the morning stagecoach rumbling down the road in a cloud of mist. Everything looked the same, but something in the air felt off, like the world had shifted slightly while he wasn't looking. Luke stepped onto the wooden porch, squinting against the morning light. Across the street, the saloon's double doors swung open, and a few of the regulars were already gathered, swapping gossip over cheap whiskey and biscuits. As he walked over to the general store, conversations hushed, then resumed in low tones as he passed. That alone told him enough. People were talking. Inside, he found old Mr. Pike, the storekeeper, sorting sacks of flour. Pike looked up with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Sheriff. Heard you had quite the adventure yesterday." Luke frowned. "That..." Luke didn't flinch. He took one slow step forward, his voice cutting through the night. You've come a long way, he called. But I mean you no harm. I saved that woman's life, no answer. Only the low rhythmic sound of drums continuing from somewhere behind the line. The woman nudged her horse forward, stopping just at the edge of the river. You tore what cannot be replaced, she said, her voice strong and cold, carrying easily over the distance. You touched what was sacred. My father has sent me to make it right. Luke's heart thudded in his chest. If I did wrong, I'll make it right. But I didn't mean disrespect. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment he thought she might order her warriors to attack. But instead she raised her hand. The drums stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. Tomorrow, she said, when the sun rises, you will come to our camp. You will face the Apache way. Before Luke could reply, she turned her horse and the line of warriors moved as one, melting back into the desert. The only sound left was the river whispering in the dark. Luke stood there long after they disappeared, the echo of her words burning in his mind. Tomorrow. The Apache way. He looked up at the moon, pale and unblinking, and for the first time in years, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He knew then that his life had changed the moment he'd pulled that woman from the river. What he thought was an act of mercy had become something else, something dangerous and sacred all at once. And by the time the next dawn touched the desert, he would have to answer for it. The drums started again, far away this time, a slow and steady pulse echoing through the valley, like the heart of the earth itself, waiting for judgment to fall. The morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of desert dawn that made every sound travel for miles. The sun climbed slow and golden over the ridge, casting long shadows across the dry land. Luke McGraw stood outside his cabin, boots planted in the dust, watching the horizon where the Apache riders had vanished hours before. The memory of the drums still echoed faintly in his head, a rhythm that hadn't stopped even when he'd tried to sleep. He'd spent the night sitting on his porch, rifle across his lap, waiting for something, he wasn't sure what. An attack, a sign, anything. But the desert had remained silent, as if holding its breath. Now, as the new day spread its heat across the land, Luke knew what he had to do. The woman had spoken clearly, come to our camp, face judgment the Apache way. If he didn't, they'd come again, and next time, they wouldn't just stand on the ridge, they'd burn Dry Creek to the ground. He saddled Duke quietly, tightening the leather straps and checking the rifle secured at the saddle. The horse snorted uneasy, as though it sensed the weight of what lay ahead. Easy, boy, Luke murmured, running a steady hand down its neck. We're not going looking for trouble, just trying to end it before it starts. He rode out before the town stirred. The sun was still low and the air carried a faint chill that would soon give way to heat. As he crossed the valley, he glanced back once at Dry Creek, a cluster of buildings huddled together like frightened children. He'd kept that town safe for years, stared down outlaws, bandits, and drifters. But this was different. This wasn't a fight over land or money. It was a matter of pride, of sacred honor, and he was caught dead in the middle of it. The trail wound through rocky passes and dry creek beds, leading him toward the high canyon. It was country few white men dared to enter, not without invitation. Luke knew the risk, but he also knew that to ignore their summons would be worse. So he rode on, letting the desert swallow him whole. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, the air shimmering with heat. He stopped once by a stream to let Duke drink, kneeling beside the water to splash his face. His reflection stared back at him, a man with tired eyes and a jaw set too hard for comfort. He'd never been one for superstition, but now, out here alone, he couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was watching him. Every rock, every whisper of wind seemed to carry eyes. By midday, he reached a high ridge overlooking a wide basin dotted with mesquite and cottonwood trees. Smoke rose in thin trails from the center, campfires. The Apache camp. Luke slowed Duke to a walk and raised his hands to show he was unarmed, though his revolver still hung at his side. He didn't want to spook anyone. As he descended into the basin, he saw them. Warriors, dozens of them, standing silent as he approached. Their faces were painted in red and black, their expressions unreadable. Bows and spears glinted in the sunlight. The air was heavy with tension, thick enough to choke on. A rider broke from the group and approached. It was the woman, Naya. She rode with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, her long hair braided and bound with feathers. The rip in her buckskin shirt had been sewn, but the memory of that moment hung between them like a ghost. She stopped a few paces away, eyes fixed on him. "You came," she said. "I gave my word," Luke replied. "I ain't one to run from what's right." Her gaze softened just a fraction, though her voice stayed firm. "You stand before my people. My father waits. He will decide your fate." Luke nodded once. "Lead the way." The camp was larger than he expected. Dozens of teepees arranged in a circle, children darting between them, women tending fires, grinding corn, or weaving cloth. The smell of wood smoke, roasted meat, and sage filled the air. But as Luke passed, conversations died, eyes followed him, and whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. He was a stranger in a sacred place, and every step felt heavier than the last. At the center of the camp stood the largest teepee, its poles adorned with eagle feathers and painted symbols of the sun and serpent. 2 guards stood outside, their faces solemn. Naya dismounted and gestured for him to follow. Luke stepped inside, ducking his head beneath the flap. The air inside was cool and dim. A fire burned low in the center, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Across from him sat an old man, tall even in age, his hair silver and his eyes sharp as knives. This was Chief Toho, the leader of the Apache band and Naya's father. His presence filled the space like thunder before a storm. Beside him sat 2 elders and a warrior with a scar running down his cheek, likely a war captain. They said nothing as Luke entered, only watched. Naya spoke first, her tone calm but edged with pride. "Father, this is the man who touched me at the river. He says it was not his will. He says he meant no insult." Chief Toho's eyes fixed on Luke. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then in deep, measured English, he said, "You come here when you could have hidden behind your walls. That speaks of courage. But courage does not erase offense. You tore my daughter's clothing. You touched her body. Among my people, such things carry meaning." Luke took a slow breath. "Chief, I swear by every honest bone in me, I meant no harm. Your daughter was drowning. I did what any decent man would do. If she hadn't fought the current, she'd be dead. I never sought to shame her." The old chief studied him, face unreadable. And yet shame came. Luke met his gaze squarely. "If I could take back that moment, I would. But I can't. All I can offer is truth and respect." Silence stretched. The fire popped softly, sending a wisp of smoke curling between them. Finally, Chief Toho turned to Naya. "You saw his eyes when he pulled you from the river. Tell me, daughter, were they cruel?" Naya hesitated, her expression flickering between defiance and thought. "No," she said at last. "They were worried. He fought the water to save me." The chief nodded slowly. Then he rose, his height imposing even in his age. "The Apache do not take revenge for accidents," he said. "But we do not ignore them either. The balance must be restored." He motioned to one of the elders, who stepped forward with a carved wooden bowl. "You will take part in the fire circle tonight," the chief continued. "You will speak your truth before the spirits, and they will judge your heart. If they find it pure, there will be peace. If not..." His voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken consequence. Luke nodded, his pulse steady but strong. "Then I'll stand before your fire." The chief's eyes softened. "Few men of your kind would. Perhaps there is still honor in the white man's heart." The meeting ended there. Naya led Luke outside, the sunlight nearly blinding after the dim of the tent. The camp had quieted. Everyone knew what would come that night, the ceremony of fire and truth. Luke followed her to a shaded spot by the river where she dismounted. The same river that had nearly taken her life now ran calm and clear, its surface glimmering under the sun. "Why'd you come back?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. "You could have stayed in your town, hidden behind your people." Luke leaned against a rock, arms crossed. "Because running don't fix nothing." "You think I don't know how this looks? You think I don't know the stories folks tell about your people? But I saw the truth. You ain't my enemy. I came here because I needed you to know that." Naya was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "When I first saw you, I thought you were like all the others, men who see us as less than them. But when you pulled me from the river, I saw something else. I just didn't understand it. In my world, a touch means something sacred. That is why I was angry." Luke nodded slowly. "Guess both our worlds got rules we don't always see. Maybe this fire of yours will set things right." She looked at him then, her dark eyes softer than before. "Or burn everything down," she said, though there was no venom in it. As the sun fell and shadows lengthened, The camp came alive with... The drums began again, faster now, joyous instead of foreboding. The people moved in rhythm, singing softly in their tongue. Luke stood still, unsure of what to do, until Naya stepped forward and offered him a woven blanket, patterned in red and gold. "This means peace," she said, "between you and my people." Luke took it, his throat tightening. "I reckon I'll wear it proud," she smiled then, small, real like the first light after a storm. That night, as the fires burned low and the stars watched in silence, Luke sat beside Naya near the edge of camp. The river whispered nearby, calm now, as if it too had forgiven. He looked at her and said quietly, "Didn't think saving someone would bring me this far." Naya chuckled softly. "Sometimes saving one life saves two." He didn't ask what she meant. He just sat there listening to the rhythm of the drums fading into the night, feeling for the first time in a long while that the desert itself had exhaled and peace had returned, if only for a while.